Welcome along everybody to our press conference today. I'll just remove my hat. Sorry for the late start, slightly late start. As we saw today, we have a new prime minister in Japan. Yeah, of course, he's Yoshihide Suga. As far as we can tell, he has signaled no major policy shift from his predecessor Shinzo Abe, but he will encounter new problems. Mr. Abe, of course, was lucky to have inherited an economy, a global economy on an upswing. But even before the pandemic struck, the economy was showing warning signs. And in addition, during his time in office, Mr. Abe made little headway on his big projects, especially beating deflation and changing the constitution. Even if the economy rebounds, as many predict in 2020, the cost of recovery from the virus is likely to add significantly to Japan's woeful fiscal situation. And Suga-san also has very little foreign policy experience. This has been pointed out many times, and he faces major foreign policy issues, an unpredictable ally with America, and serious territorial disputes with China, Russia, and Korea. Well, we've invited two veteran analysts to discuss these issues. Michael Cucek, who is online, I hope, we'll just check. He is a friend. Hi, Michael. He is a friend to the club. He's been here many times. He's an assistant professor at Temple University, and he will be mainly discussing domestic political affairs. And then the gentleman here sitting with me at the table is Tsuneo Watanabe. He's a senior fellow at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and he will be focusing on foreign affairs and national security issues. I believe that Michael is going to go ahead first with some prepared remarks, and then Watanabe-san will follow after him. We'll ask them to keep their comments to 30 minutes if they can. That's the comments of both of them together, so we'll have lots of time for questions. Can I just remind you, if you haven't already, to switch off your mobile phones to avoid disrupting the speakers. Michael, onegaishimasu.
Oh, I'd like to start off with a confession. If you had asked me 3 weeks ago whether Suga would really want to be prime minister, I would have said no. And indeed, I'm on record as saying that after 7 years and 8 months as chief cabinet secretary, that's enough. That's a career. You can walk away. You've been in charge of the basic day-by-day running of the government for an immense amount of time, nonstop in his case, and longer than any chief cabinet secretary by a factor of 2 has ever been able to do this incredibly demanding job. He could take a well-deserved rest. Well, he has not done so. And he is now the prime minister of Japan and will this evening announce his cabinet, the executive of Japan. How we got here happened a lot over the month of August and some part of this month, and involved a lot of discussions clearly that were well out of the public view. The announcement of the resignation of Prime Minister Abe was, you can detect hints of trouble, but the actual announcement did come as a surprise. And now, just 2 weeks later, we have a new prime minister, a person for whom myself is a surprise successor. There are certain things that I'd like to point out regarding my view of what has happened and what is the current status of Japanese politics. And those would be organized into first a look at Suga himself, then a look at what the picks for the positions, particularly the positions inside the LDP, is telling us about the direction where the party is heading. And then what I think are the elements of what we can definitely know about what's going to happen in terms of changes in terms of policy or stance. And then finally, looking, just saying a few things about the opposition, because everyone is very interested in the concept of an early election. And the likelihood of that election being led by Mr. Suga and both his cabinet and, more importantly, the structures of the LDP, the various positions. I would like to say, first of all, that in being wrong about Suga Yoshihide's desire to be prime minister, I was still right. In that what we have had over the last few days was a very, very strange process selecting the president of the LDP. Strange in that it's a process that is a throwback to the times, basically one has to look back to the 1970s to see an effort on the part of the factions, which are not officially a part of the LDP, but nevertheless are part of the structure of Japanese politics, asserting themselves and asserting their right to arrange the political system in such a way as to benefit themselves, ignoring, in this case, the necessary changes or seeming necessary changes that happened in the 1990s as regards the prime minister, putting the prime minister first, and most importantly, putting the prime minister in a telegenic framework. Basically, we now have a prime minister with virtually no charisma. This is very, very different from what we have expected for prime ministers. Mr. Suga, whatever his decency, whatever the wonderful common touch he may have, or whatever middle-class background he may come out of, which makes for a great story, nevertheless, when he appears on camera, as he did and has for the past few days, is a deeply unimpressive figure. This is very different. Ever since the LDP went for pizzazz, starting with Hashimoto Ryutaro in the 1990s, the expectation is that the prime minister at least has something to offer in terms of connecting with at least some aspect of the public. I cannot, in the selection of Suga, see any recognition that popular appeal is a necessary part of the prime minister's toolkit. That is very different from the things that we have been expecting regarding the prime minister and his role. In terms of what that's going to mean in the future, my guess is that without that charismatic atmosphere, the tendency will be to try to attract attention through populist moves. We've already seen this in Suga as chief cabinet secretary, pushing hard for lower fees in terms of mobile telephony, that to buy popularity by that means. And we will probably see similar populist moves, reductions in NHK fees as being something that will be pushed hard. All kinds of fees and reductions will be proposed in a way of bribing the voters to like this otherwise rather pallid individual. That's my first point. And when I say pallid, again, whatever his personal decency and personal the personal foundations of his self, nevertheless, it doesn't come out on television, and it doesn't come out in broadcast. And for me, I'm very interested and have been very interested in the relationship between the media and the qualities of leadership in Japan. The second aspect I'd like to discuss is the utter predominance of the factions in the selection process, that there was virtually no sense that Suga could lose after several factions lined up behind him, that there was in the selection process a naked power mongering by the leaders of a certain group of factions, starting most importantly, of course, with the Secretary General, now again Secretary General of the party, Nikai. Nikai arranged for the movement of factions into a arrangement so that Suga's election would appear inevitable and virtually a juggernaut. Now, again, as someone who looks at the media message being sent, this is almost a message to the Japanese public. Here is your prime minister. Take him because that's all you're going to get. We want him, and that's all that matters. It's a very, very oppressive message that, again, one would think in the modern era that there would be a way of doing that quietly, or at least a way of doing it less obtrusively. This was obtrusive. This was clearly in the face of any idea of the public having any say. Now, there was massaging of the selection process to appear to be more democratic, but in the end, the juggernaut of the selection process just simply rolled over the resistance that was offered by these two candidates. One, Ishiba Shigeru, the longtime nemesis of Abe Shinzo ever since the 2012 election, where Ishiba won in the first round, but then was defeated. Vote was amongst only members of the LDP who were in the Diet, and Kishida Fumio, who in his case was always the very nice guy who got the short end of the stick. And indeed, this time, he did not get fully the lowest position. Excuse me, I have a sound problem. I will have to mute my microphone for one moment. I apologize.
All right, Michael, I'll take that opportunity to remind you that you're at 15 minutes. Yeah. So if you can wind up your remarks as soon as you can, thanks. Okay. All right.
Okay,
Well,
now the wine has gone away. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for telling me the time. Basically, the factions selected the prime minister, again, in a naked fashion, which I found to be extraordinary. The reason why I didn't think Suga would ever want this position is because he had been in an administrative position that was, in some ways, far more powerful than the actual position of a prime minister, and that administration mattered to him. This would be a step down. But I've become to the conclusion that what we have is not a Suga premiership. What we have is a continued Abe premiership. I say that in that the atmospherics and the body language of everyone seems to indicate that Mr. Abe physically will no longer be the prime minister, but nevertheless will be a strong influence on all types of policy and upon all policy choices. In this new arrangement, which I'm likening to a Soviet-style troika with Abe, Nikai, and Deputy Prime Minister Aso basically monopolizing the power, but sharing it amongst themselves. In this arrangement, there are certain things that we know will happen and certain things we know will not happen. There will be no further investigation of the Moritomo Gakuen or Kake Gakuen scandals. Whatever Mr. Suga might think, that is not going to happen. There will be a continuation of the linear motor car, even though the Shizuoka Prefecture has gone against that project. It is a favorite project of Mr. Abe's, and even though he's off the dais, he is still very much behind the scenes. We are going to see most likely a very, very vigorous discussion, again, from the side of the stage, from Mr. Abe and his allies, of a preemptive military strike capability that Japan currently does not have all of the pieces to in terms of technology, and definitely does not have the pieces to in terms of doctrine. And finally, I would, in terms of COVID-19, which is the major source of everyone's distress at this time, there will be no re-examination of Minister Nishimura's decisions and his decision-making processes in regards to the balance between economic revival and in terms of controlling the virus. None of this will be examined or be questioned in the way that if there were a truly independent and new person at the top, could be possible. Last thing about the opposition. The CDPJ has absorbed a large fraction of the Democratic Party of the People. This is an inevitable event. The DPP simply did not have the numbers in terms of popular support to survive the next election. A few district members would survive, and those few district members have indeed followed party leader Tamaki into a small project that he is doing, whose purpose I don't quite understand, other than to assert Mr. Tamaki's special qualities, which are not insignificant. The remaining 150 or so legislators who are in the DPJ have retained the old name, have retained the leadership of Edano. It is, yes, a reassembly of the DPJ. And if it does receive the support of Rengo, that is to say the Confederation of Japan's unions, it will have at least ostensibly a ground game to challenge the powers of the LDP in terms of having at least a set of people to put up posters, a set of people to make phone calls, etc., which the CDPJ previously did not have. So if we're going into an election, there is a great deal of uncertainty in terms of the charisma deficit of the leader of the LDP, the seeming in-your-face attitude of the factions toward appealing to the public and including them in the process of selecting a leader for the country. And finally, in terms of the CDPJ reassembling the old Democratic Party of Japan, which was a vital force and which was a solution, perhaps not the best one, to the problem of providing the LDP with an alternative.
Thanks so much, Michael. We'll come back to you in a second. Over to Watanabe-san.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here. So I'm basically in Japan. I'm a US watcher, but in the United States, I have been a Japan watcher. So I'm watching both. And in English, I explained what's going on in Japan. In Japanese, I explained what's going on in the United States. And a very interesting moment this time because the many people are wondering, Mr. Suga could have any good chemistry with Mr. Trump? And the answer is probably no. So that's very interesting moment to watch. But I think, of course, that's the one very impressive one things I need to count my time. I think Suga was unimpressive in a sense, and actually Michael already explained the reason why the LDP pick up a very the smoky and unclear process. The reason is simply LDP is not afraid of opposition party. If opposition party is popular and strong, they're afraid of unimpressive leader. But you know, somehow opposition is weak. That is the case. And I think a similar case happened before. When LDP picked up Prime Minister Obuchi. Obuchi is famous. At that time, New York Times maybe wrote about it, cold pizza. Suga is not cold pizza, however. The reason is Suga has been in a chief cabinet secretary in Abe administration, and he appeared in TV almost every day. So that's good somehow. But very unimpressive to the foreign leader. that is a bad. So a lack of a foreign policy experience of Suga would be kind of the worried of maybe LDP too. And I think one interesting thing, what's going on in Suga's foreign policy, I think the answer is pretty much the same as Abe, or LDP's policy continues. And somehow the Abe set up a very good standard for the Japan's foreign and security policy. That's the most very strong US-Japan alliance, and also try to make a subtle balance with getting along with China in economic policy. So the big challenge for any leader, even Abe continues, is how to make a balance. Tough on China, but maintain some economic relation. And especially, you know, now the Trump administration is moving more strong economic statecraft, or I would say the partial disengagement to China. So how Japan can cooperate? That is a big challenge. So I think Suga, the charm would be, Suga can be expected to the good teamwork. Teamwork means the cabinet team should work together. And I think Suga also know how to control the bureaucrats. So Suga's somehow recent policy appeal is how to get back Japan's slow process of digitalization of office in the private and the government. Because Suga served once Minister of Communication and Internal Affairs. I think this ministry in charge for the communication. So I think the Suga would be very interesting prime minister if he survived the election. But of course, in the election 1 year, we don't know. And also Trump or Biden, very different. I think for Biden, somehow easier for Suga. But for Trump, Suga need to prepare something. So he's preparing something already. That is a support from Mr. Abe. That is very important. If I were Suga, I would appoint Prime Minister Abe to the Deputy Prime Minister. But now the Mr. Aso is sitting. So maybe special envoy for just Trump. Especially after November 3rd, if Trump continues to be, probably, possibly. And also, the Abe, what Abe would do after retirement of Prime Minister, he doesn't retire. He continues to be the Diet members. So that is a model, is Prime Minister Nakasone. After achieving a good leadership among leaders, especially the closer friendship with Ronald Reagan, I think he vowed to play not just main player, but picking up a ball boy in foreign affairs. So what Abe can do is this kind of things. And Suga is wise enough to put a very important person in a new cabinet. That is a defense minister, new defense minister, Kishi. Kishi is a younger brother of Abe. So I think Suga really need to help over Abe for foreign affairs. By the way, the Suga's Kishi's pickup is very interesting because China doesn't like it. Kishi played a de facto ambassador type, de facto liaison to the Taiwan. And he created a close tie with President Tsai Ing-wen. So China doesn't like it, but probably Trump administration like it. So I think that's gonna be very interesting moment. And also, I think many people may be wondering Suga's foreign policy, and because he didn't say any foreign policy before. But I think a major issue between the United States and Japan. I think Suga was a key person. I have been, I told you, working in the US think tank, Center for Strategic International Studies, 1995 to the 2005. And I'm still adjunct fellow. And CSIS occasionally had the reception in Tokyo. At that time, Mr. Suga attended always and gave some speech. And he was supported at that time by his staff, foreign ministers, Mr. My memory is so bad. Sorry, he's my friend, but I missed his name. He's Ichikawa Keiichi, now the Director General of North American Bureau, and he served as the chief of staff to the Suga, the very first half of chief cabinet secretary. And also, Keiichi Ichikawa worked in political minister in Japan's embassy, Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C. And probably you may remember, Suga visited the United States last year. Usually chief cabinet secretary don't visit, but he did. And he saw Vice President Pence and at the time acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan. What they talked about it, actually the major three issues. One is a US-Japan alliance and issue. What is a major issue? US-based relocation in Okinawa. That Suga has been working on very closely. Suga respected his mentor, former Chief Cabinet Secretary Kajiyama. Kajiyama is the father of a current METI Minister Kajiyama. And Kajiyama is an architect of a current SACO agreement, SACO, the Special Action Committee on Okinawa. So the Suga saw how Kajiyama Sr. has been working on closely coordinating Okinawa local and central government and the United States. The United States is a complex, complicated government and Congress and the military. So I think that's very important. And the Suga could work seriously and can get some point in US-Japan alliance. And another issue we're working on is a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's very important issue. And Mr. Abe did a very good the idea of a combination of realism and liberalism. Realism is a balance of power, how to maintain the balance against China. And liberalism is a maintain the free trade, free economic world. So Abe initiated CPTPP despite of Trump's giving up. So I think many people expect Abe continue to be the work on more proactive contribution to the regional order. Suga, maybe, I think Suga continue to this kind of things. And as long as Suga has a good score in the domestic policy, economy and employment and COVID-19, I think Suga has a chance. And let's remember, Obuchi, Prime Minister Obuchi's expectation was very low because many people think he's the cold pizza. But he did a very good job, actually maintaining a good US-Japan relations. And even he visited the White House. He was a state guest and gave a very nice speech. Actually, I listened. I think low expectation on the foreign affairs on Suga is a good chance for the Suga to survive. But of course, nobody knows the chemistry between Trump and Suga. So let's see. All right, that's my end.
Thank you very much. I'll just bite first question just on the Michael. This would be to you, I think. Just on the cold pizza issue. You know, the charisma thing. I wonder if it's overestimated. I mean, you know, Shinzo Abe wasn't exactly Elvis Presley, was he? and you also had Yasuo Fukuda and Noda, people like that. The charisma thing tends to be the media, the foreign media actually makes a lot about it. But do you think it's that important with Suga?
Well, I think it's unimportant. I think it's important in terms of trying to make up for other deficits. He does not have a personal faction behind him. That's one of the, we're supposed to be impressed by the fact that he became PM without that. But one has to be realistic. One has to have a set of either industries behind you, factions behind you, some kind. Of course, he has the bureaucracy, which he knows very well, but that's not often a tool in terms of political fights. The ace card for many prime ministers, such as Koizumi Junichiro, is his ability to simply go to the public and use that as a way of getting what he wants done. Suga does not have that card, and doesn't have any of the other traditional ones that I can see.
Thank you. Well, that segues into a question then. This is from Andy Sharp of the Nikkei. He points out this new cabinet appears to have just 2 women. And again, we have, a testosterone heavy cabinet of, mainly older men. Andy wants to know how do you think that will be viewed by voters? Do you think it will make any difference, the perception of the cabinet, another cabinet, as being a bunch of old men?
Who's that to?
Well, let's show it to you because it is addressed to you, Michael. Sorry, that's from Andy.
Oh, all right. Then, yeah, I don't, considering that it didn't hurt Mr. Abe all this time. True, he had a lot of women in the first cabinet, but then only had a very small number through most of the 7 years and 8 months of this second Abe administration. I wish it were the case that one could say, aha, they don't get it and they're going to pay for it at the polls. I don't think that that's actually a factor, unfortunately. However, it's very clear that the CDPJ sees the exact opposite. When they set up their photograph of the new leadership, they surrounded party leader Adano with women, even though they were not necessarily the next in the hierarchy. So one would hope that it matters, but I don't think it matters in terms of electing LDP officials.
Okay, thank you. Watanabe-san, would you like to say anything about that?
As for the women, there's 2 women. One is a former Minister of Justice, Kamikawa, again come back. And also the Olympic, the Seiko Hashimoto, a famous skater, and she stayed. I think this cabinet is pretty much the recycling the minister who used to work in the Abe administration, because this Abe administration was so long time, so continued so long. So I think this is a kind of a more concentrating a continuity and taking over. Anyway, election is coming soon, so doesn't have to be the colorful figure.
Well, seeing as how you've raised the issue of the election, would you like to speculate on when that might be? You said it's coming soon, either of the speakers. Watanabe-san?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe?
The election timing is very, very difficult to predict right now because Kono, Taro Kono, who used to be the defense minister, current defense minister, and now in charge for the administrative reform minister, talked about the potentially the election is coming soon. But of course, that's really kind of a testing water. Because of COVID-19, very difficult to have election, where sometimes such election could be pretty much against. But anyway, the term of current lower house members expires next fall. I think Suga need an election anyway before the election, and having an election after just term end is a really bad, no strategy, and it could be some repeat of ASO administration who were defeated by DPJ, Democratic Democratic Party of Japan. So I think still we don't know. It's up to, first of all, popularity of Suga cabinet, how they were popular after the all figures now, and how popular opposition party.
Thank you. Let's get the Olympic question out of the way as well, seeing as how you raised the name Seiko Hashimoto, Watanabe-san. She's on the record as saying the games must be held next year at any cost. Michael, would you like to comment on this first? Do you think they will be held, and at what cost?
The cost will be in Olympics where there are no foreign attendees in the stands. If that's acceptable to the Olympics movement, that's doable. But that's about all that's doable. It can be done, I think, using very, very strict quarantine measures. Now, there are sports superpowers which have done very poorly at that. So whatever the desires of Japan in this matter, everything's in the hands of men in Moscow, men and women in the United States and Washington, far more than whatever anyone here in Tokyo says.
Thank you. Watanabe-san, would you like to comment on that? Just the prospect of the Olympics happening next year?
We never know, of course, the COVID-19 and the other factors too. So potentially Olympic may happen. Potentially could be canceled. It's like an election. We never know.
Okay. Well, I have some questions lined up here from our online viewers, but I will throw it open to the floor. Would anybody here in the room like to ask a question to either speaker? Rocky? When you come to the microphone, will you tell us who you are and the name of your organization? Thanks a lot.
Rocky Swift with Reuters. I hope you'll forgive a kind of focused question for my beat. I'm a healthcare and pharma reporter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I was wondering if the speakers could perhaps comment on Abe's legacy in terms of healthcare and drug reform. You know, he famously got his second term because of new drugs for his colitis issue. And under this last term, drug approvals and research and development have had some gains. Do you have an opinion on that, and possibly where that might go under a Suga or under the next administrations? Thank you.
I'll take the first shot at that.
Go ahead.
I think that the priorities of Mr. Abe will be very important to Mr. Suga, that there will be constant communication. And indeed, Mr. Abe is very interested in the introduction of new medical technology and the quick acceptance of new drugs. So I'm fairly confident that will continue, based simply on the importance of Abe in this and on the sidelines, off stage, but still very, very influential over what gets decided.
Thank you.
And let me answer the question, because the Suga is pretty much interested in administrative reform or deregulation, because he understands that it's very difficult to do. So he knows how to control bureaucrats. So he's a very one of a charm or technique or strength. So I'm sure that he would like to realize it without achieving anything very difficult to survive in the election. Because, you know, if Suga didn't have a majority in LDP, that's big disaster. But that's not likely. But even Suga lose many seats, it's kind of a potentially the restructuring, like, you know, the LDP, part of LDP may have some coalition with opposition. So Suga really need to maintain a good majority in the next election. So Suga really need to achieve something. What? That's the deregulation is clearly the one issue.
Thank you. So this question is from, this comes from online. It's from Walter Sim of the Straits Times, Singapore paper. Could you discuss the appointments in Suga's first cabinet today, in particular your analysis of Kishi, which you've already touched on, becoming defense minister, and Kono taking charge of administrative reforms? It's a two-part question. How does Suga's pledge to enlist reform-minded people square with the fact that many on his team are familiar faces? Who wants to have a go at that one? Michael?
I would comment about the Kono appointment. Kono also, along with Suga, has always had a great interest in administrative reform and talked a lot about it. And the lateral move over to there makes sense in terms of interest, but also more importantly, it makes sense in terms of keeping a potential rival in a future contest close by. So what I would say about the Kono appointment is that it gives him a tough job and it keeps him occupied instead of politicking and preparing for the next round of when Suga has to face the LDP presidency election again.
Thank you. What time is that?
Yeah, I'll comment on the Kishi, Defense Minister Kishi. I already told you, Kishi is the younger brother of Shinzo Abe and a very conservative politician. So I think that's kind of somehow easy to work on the foreign country except China. Well, you know, China is very unpopular because they are on assertive action and troublemaking in international rule. So I think that's not so big issue. A big, serious issue is probably more focusing on how to have a good relation with President Trump. So again, Kishi is good because I'm sure Mr. Trump appreciated the relation with Abe still. So this is Abe's brother. I think that's not so bad things. I think, and also I'd like to comment another key person, Chief Cabinet Secretary. Big trouble for the Suga is that Suga doesn't have a Suga, right? Because I think Suga really needed to the very effective Chief Cabinet Secretary. Chief Cabinet Secretary is a total manager of a whole bureaucrats and politicians.
That's Kato-san, right?
Right, Kato-san. Kato used to be deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary under Suga. So Suga no Kato. But interesting one is the Suga first asked the Kajiyama, current METI, to the deputy. So it seems to me Suga knows how to control. So Suga don't need a Suga again. So he can manage. But Kato is a good person to work with Suga. So I think Kato, how smoothly Kato is managing a cabinet is very important for the Suga to achieve many issues, especially the deregulation issue. That's complicated issue. Really need to the strength to control, especially the bureaucrats.
I would like to add to that regarding Kato. I mean, he himself is an ex-finance ministry bureaucrat and is of the elite himself. So he knows what he's dealing with in regards to that aspect of the job. Personally, he's an incredibly affable, very disarmingly charming individual. So I'm in terms of the press aspect of being the spokesman, I think that it will be a much less tense atmosphere in the Kante press conferences than it has been for quite some time.
Thanks a lot. You were quite generous in your comments there, Watanabe-san, about Abe-san's foreign policy achievements, but we didn't touch on Korea. I don't think even his most fervent supporters could say that relations with Korea have improved under Abe's tenure. Do you think Suga can make any headway there, or do you think that's a lost cause?
I think I forgot one thing. Suga talked about a North Korea issue with Vice President Pence and Acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan. So North Korea and that's development of a nuclear and abductee issue. That's still the continuing issue. And South Korea. Japan's relation with South Korea is really bad now. And probably nobody can easily fix this. However, probably the Suga is a better position than Abe because Suga is not expected to visit controversial Yasukuni Shrine. And that may apply to the relation with China too. So Suga doesn't share the conservative history view with Abe. That's kind of a good news for the South Korea. But at the same time, unfortunately, current trouble is one thing is the pretty much related to the current South Korean government position. I don't think Suga would change South Korean government position soon. So I'm not so optimistic, but not so totally pessimistic.
Thank you. And you said before the press conference to me that Suga has never gone to Yasukuni. Is that right?
As a prime minister.
As prime minister.
I don't know. Suga may have visited, but as a prime minister, he is not expected to visit.
He's not expected to visit. Okay, I see. Has he been as a politician, to your knowledge?
I know visiting Yasukuni Shrine is not so bad things.
Okay.
Bad things is not so controversial things before. So I don't know. Maybe Suga visited. I have no idea, but that's not big trouble.
The next question is also online. It comes from Isabel Reynolds of Bloomberg, who, by the way, is the new president of our club. She says, Shinjiro Koizumi remains environment minister. Do you see any chance the new government will take climate change more seriously, especially given the disastrous weather events in Japan in recent years? We'll put that one to Michael first, if you don't mind, and then we'll go to you, Watanabe-san.
That's a hard one. Does that mean that's? I think that the government does take it very seriously, and that it feels hemmed in, or has been feeling hemmed in, by a commitment to restart nuclear power plants as the solution to Japan's CO2 emissions and their surge after the 3/11 disaster. I think Suga is still on board with that. And that is a problematic stance that prioritizes restarting nuclear plants instead of working toward a much more viable mix in terms of energy generation. And with Japan having walked away from its Kyoto obligations because of 3/11, the basis of its climate change stance is we are the country to imitate. If it's not the country to imitate, I don't see movement, but maybe I'm misunderstanding Mr. Suga's basic position.
For the environmental issue, especially the climate change, I think Japan has been working on quite seriously, especially the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And the question is Minister Koizumi can take lead. I think that's a little bit questionable. The reason is that he's relatively junior in LDP. So, but I think in the future, his experience in the environmental issue would be the good chance if he become more senior in LDP. So I think the situation may change. For example, if Biden is elected in the U.S., I think he's more tackling on issues. And that environmental issue could be the discussion between Japan and the United States. That case, I'm sure that all Japanese government more seriously considering this issue.
Right. That seems to suggest that Japan won't strike out on its own, that it needs American leadership. Is that right?
Well, that's very true. I think, yeah. And by the way, the reason is not only the US, but the US and China, number one, number two, the emitter of the CO2. So I think the US is giving up the Paris Accord is a big impact to any country who has been working seriously. Oh, US and China is not working, or how we could sacrifice our own economy.
That being said, Koizumi has lined up against his own father, going against coal rather than nuclear. And if that's the direction, that indeed, as Watanabe-san points out, that's an in with a Biden administration, that Japan commits not only to giving up coal domestically, but also stopping its investment in coal plants, or Japanese investment in coal plants all around the world. That could be one of the bargaining chips that a Suga would bring to a Biden discussion.
Right. You'd like to be a fly on the wall in the Koizumi household and Shogatsu there. Let me just check if anybody in the room wants to ask a question before I go to our online questions again. Anybody have a question in the room? Working journalist or none? No. Okay. This is from Ilgin Yorulmaz. She's with BBC World Turkish. What can we expect from Mr. Suga's reforms, his promise to reform the bureaucracy, which hindered the effective handling of the coronavirus pandemic in the respect to testing, contact tracing, and the strategy to keep the economy despite a possible spike in cases in winter? So she's criticizing the way the bureaucracy worked and asking whether we can believe Mr. Suga's promise to reform the bureaucracy. Michael, would you like to try that one?
Sure. The question of administrative reform is one that I tend not to take very seriously because Japan is a relatively under-administered country. It has the fewest, the second fewest number of government employees per capita per 100,000 population in the OECD. It is run basically on a very tight ship. Now, you can talk about regulations being overbearing, but in terms of reforming bureaucracy and bureaucrats, it's a pretty tight ship. And it's to think that there are going to be heads rolling and a lot of moving things around, I think that's a fantasy.
Thank you. Very interesting. Watanabe-san, do you want to add to that?
I think reforming a bureaucracy is the kind of a magic word to appeal the people in Japan. And probably if attain something like deregulation or restructure of ministries, some Japanese people believe, oh, this leadership worked. But the target could be the real deregulation. I think that depends on the issues. So how Suga would focus on a very appealing deregulation issue, was the successful or not. That's point he can survive in the next election.
Hating bureaucrats is not what is going to happen, and it's not. That's an old 1990s trope. That's not going to do any good.
Okay. Whatever we think about the Abe reign, he did talk a good fight, didn't he, when he came to power? I mean, he said he was going to raise GDP to $6 trillion. He said he was going to balance the budget. He said he was going to raise the birth rate, bring the constitution up to date. I don't think that's, let's wait to see, of course, what happens with Suga-san, but we don't expect as much from Suga-san, do we? I mean, I guess it's a polemical question, but Michael, first, do you think it's more likely that Suga accepts that Japan is a declining power, that he gives up this quest for great power status that Abe seemed to embody?
That's whatever the rhetoric may be, the reality is the demographic angle of the loss last year of 500,000 people. That's an inevitable reality. Japan's horizons are shrinking. It is set against the rising economic power of China, so it makes the shrinkage look even bigger. Suga-san will say what a politician will, and he will have Kishi and others to talk a big game, but there are not the resources to match that game, or match that talk.
Watanabe-san?
Yeah, Abe's free and open in the Pacific policy is not a great power for foreign policy issue. I think rather I would regard it as a middle power diplomacy. So because Japan really respect coordination and cooperation with Australia, India, and sometimes Canada, I think that is a reality. Japan cannot be the real superpower or big power or even a great power. I think that's clear, considering shrinking population and the shrinking economy. So in that sense, Abe was a very good. I think never say middle power diplomacy. Instead, to use a proactive contribution to peace or free and open Pacific. I think Suga continued to Japan's middle power diplomacy without saying middle power.
Well, thank you very much to both speakers, Tsuneo Watanabe, a senior fellow with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and online, Michael Cucek, assistant professor at Temple University. I think we appreciate their comments and appreciate them coming in and giving us their views on what we can expect, and maybe you'll return when Suga-san steps down and we have a new election and tell us what the next prime minister will do. Thanks so much. Do show your appreciation to our speakers today for showing up. Thanks so much.
Thank you.